for a second time. For those that weren't here earlier, I had an opportunity to share a little bit about some of the cultural observations I had during a hike in Israel. For about 2 months, we got back about a month ago. And so today I'm going to take the opportunity to talk about exile and sojourning. And I don't have a clock up here, but I assume the cell phone is somebody's. I don't know. But anyway, just wave your hands when that's time for me to be done. So I've been working on this concept in my mind for probably about 2 years. The concept of sojourning and exile and its purpose within the Christian walk. So when we kept Passover in Jerusalem this year, we followed the Haggadah, which is a written text that the Jews follow that go through the different ceremonial concepts related to the observance of the Passover. And the Jews recognize that everyone in their life has a journey and an exit of Egypt that they need to take. That we all participate in the exodus of Egypt, maybe not literally, but it is a universal, eternal issue where we make this journey out of Egypt. So the Passover becomes a very real and important personal aspect of our Christian journey. And I would just propose, I really appreciate everyone participating this morning and having questions, but how many of you felt like you have been on a journey out of Egypt, a sort of a personal exodus or a personal exile, of wandering in the desert for portions of your life? All right, so I'm in good company. You see, when I was in college, I turned my back on the Lord. I did things and was not obedient. And I felt like the Lord showed a lot of favor on me through high school. But in college, I made some bad decisions, and I felt like I went into an exile and a wandering in the desert. And my wife will attest to this, that it was a long exile. It wasn't quite 40 years, but I never really came out of that exile until I cried out to the Lord. And he heard my cry. And that definitely reflects Israel's cry out to the Lord. So when my daughter passed away, I cried out. And there was a time where if you're gonna cry out, it's during a time of separation. So when there's a separation that occurs, there's an injury, there is a tendency for us to cry out. And what you hope and pray is that God will reciprocate and he'll hear that cry, that he will be aware of it, he'll acknowledge that. And as some of you have heard the stories, but God heard the cry, and he reinforced that he was with us, and he had not forgotten me in my exile. And I felt like that event brought me out of that personal exile. It brought me out of that sojourning into a place where I once again felt the presence of the Lord in my life like I hadn't in a long time. And I explained that sometimes as we were sitting there praying, and I felt the presence of the Lord like I could reach into the kingdom. It was an amazing experience. It was a place that you could reside for eternity in. But it is an experiential situation. You can't read about it in the Bible, but it is an experience that says the Lord is with us and he is present. So this whole concept of exile and sojourning has really been speaking to me for quite a few years now. And I felt like as we went on this hike in Israel, that there was both physical and spiritual aspects of this trip that were going to speak to that sojourning, this walking within a wilderness. Because here we were literally starting at the Red Sea, and we were walking through the Negev desert in a position where it wasn't our home. We didn't know the language. And so many of us are so critical of Israel. We're like, what's wrong with you guys? You saw this, you split, you got manna, you got the rock, you got the water, you got all this, and yet you want to go back to Egypt and your faith is weak. And I testify here that if Israel's faith was weak, mine was 10 times weaker. Because as you walk through the Negev desert, there is no water. And we had places where the natural parks of Israel had put out water tanks. And I had my GPS phone and it told me the way to go. And it was relatively safe compared to back then. I mean, I didn't have like the Pezites and the Ezites and all the ites that were out there ready to kill you. Maybe there were some people who might steal my backpack, but no one was really gunning for me. And yet I was obsessed as we walked on the trail about where are we going to sleep, where are we going to eat, what are we going to do with our food, am I going to get my kids back alive so my wife doesn't kill me. All of these things were going through my head, and as an American, I want to control my environment. I want to have everything planned out. I want to understand exactly what's going on. And when you're in the desert, that's not the case. You are subject to the weather, you're subject to interruptions, you're subject to the trail being closed. So many things are outside of your control. And so, what do you take away from this journey? What do you learn that has spiritual implications within your life about being a sojourner and being an exile? And so today I want to take the opportunity to share some thoughts around exile and sojourning, because I think it refocuses our idea about what God's grace is towards us, what His plan is. And so I'm going to start with a series of questions, and I just really appreciate your thought on this, because it's a really important topic. It's a really important topic, in my opinion, of what I read in the Bible. So my first question is, what does exile and sojourning mean to you? Weston was arguing with a gentleman last weekend, and his argument was, is God take risks? Is he a risk taker? And Weston was like, no, he's not. And the other guy was, yes, he is. And there was a debate going on, but they never defined what risk was. So they may have been in total unity, but without the definition of what they're talking about, the argument was just going to go in circles. So to start this out, I'd really like to understand, and I'd like you to understand, what is exile and what is sojourning? Does anyone have any ideas out there? Did I see your hand there? Oh, come on. What does it mean to you, though?
Exile means to me to be cast out.
To be cast out? Okay. Cast out of what?
Different things, depending on where you're at in life.
Okay. That's good. So cast out is part of it, yes?
Outside the camp, allowed to watch life go on, but you can't be a part of it.
So not be a part of a camp, okay? Just sit outside the camp? Yeah, because they would take lepers and they would put them outside the camp, right? Anyone else? I know there's some other ideas here. There's a lot of smart people in this room. Dusty, what does it mean to you?
Maybe off the path, so God's designed you with a purpose in mind, and He wove you, and He knew all your days before yet one of them was, yet you're off of that. The ideal God had created you for, you're off of that, you're wandering through something else, and you just feel like you're missing something, and you're not where you need to be.
Right.
And you need to get back somehow.
Okay. Mr. Coleman?
I think it might be sometimes you drift off the path.
Okay, so it's a drifting off the path. Is it voluntary or is it compulsory?
Could be both.
Could be both. Okay, so I'm not going to answer the question, what does exile and sojourning mean, until you answer another question. Name some people that were sojourners and exiles in the Bible. Let's do the speak. Mr. Frazee? Mrs. Frazee?
Everything I think of, like, no, it weren't.
Abraham.
Abraham, absolutely. Moses. Where was Moses exiled from?
I don't exactly remember.
You don't remember. Anybody have an answer for her?
Egypt.
Egypt. He was cast out of Egypt, wasn't he? Abraham, where did he leave? How about it? So you were hitting at Israel. That's the most famous exile. So Israel was taken to exile, they went to Babylon. So if you read through like Nehemiah, Ezra, Jeremiah, they're all talking about the exile of Israel having, what happened to them? They went from where to where? Yeah, they went to Babylon. Where did they come from?
The north.
The north tribe.
They came from Canaan or Israel, right? So what did they leave? They left their home. Yeah. What did Abraham leave? What did Joseph do? He left his family and his home. What did Daniel leave?
Everything.
Everything. He left his home too. So what do you see in common here? What are they all leaving? They're all leaving their home. So exile and sojourning means that this is not your home. You've been cast out of your home. It's a banishment from your home. It is a displacement from your home. All the definitions seem to revolve around this concept of home and being out of the home. And so you are a wanderer. So when I went to Israel and the Weston Aiden went with me, we were not in Lewisburg anymore. And when I would say I was from Kansas, the only thing they knew is, oh, this isn't Kansas anymore, is it? That's the only thing they knew in Israel was that the Wizard of Oz. So the Wizard of Oz did a pretty amazing thing for the state of Kansas, and it put it on this map. Missouri, not to be left out, is from where Truman is from. So obviously that is an important place, but Kansas is fictional and has little elves and whatever they're called, munchkins. Okay, so we're talking about what is sojourning exile, and I'll just say that it is a displacement from one's home. And so I guess I'd ask you, what does home mean to you? What does home mean to you? When you think of home, what are some adjectives that you would use to describe home? Comfort,
Security.
love,
Safety.
safety.
Security.
My friends and family.
It's a place for close communion with family and friends. What else?
Love.
Love. So I love those comments. It is a place of comfort. It is a place of joy, of peace, of rest. It is all of those things. And I'd ask you, and I'm not going to ask you to answer this, is it a place? Is it a place? And I'll use an example. My grandparents, my whole family settled in western Colorado. A lot of them settled with Brigham Young. They came out, they were Mormons, and they traveled west. And they settled on the border between Colorado and Utah. And my grandparents were part of Calvary Chapel, so they were not Mormons. But they grew up as Christians in a small community called Gateway. And it was a small community where everyone came together for dances on the weekends. They all went to church on Sundays. They were all of good value. They were all hardworking. They were all ranchers. There were all these super positive attributes that they would tell us about. So when they retired, they moved back to Gateway, wanting to go back and go home, to remember what home was like. And when they got back to Gateway, it wasn't what they remembered. They say you can never really go home. You kind of get an aroma of home, but home is something that I'll propose that none of us have truly experienced in this life. So they became disillusioned, and they eventually moved back to Grand Junction and away from Gateway because it was a small town and not a lot was going on there, and all their friends and all their memories and all the love and comfort, peace, and everything else that they envisioned as home was not there. So this sort of tees up the golf ball for the talk here. Sojourning exile is not being home. And we've defined home as a place where you have comfort, you have rest, you have peace, you have relationship. It may not be a place, it may be a place. We'll talk about that a little bit more. So what is the purpose of exile and sojourning? Because we see exile from Revelation. So who was exiled in Revelation? John. He was on the Isle of Patmos. He had been exiled by the Romans. All the way back to Genesis. Who was exiled in Genesis? Adam and Eve. And then later their son Cain. And then Joseph was exiled, and Abraham was exiled, and Israel was exiled, and Judah was exiled. And Paul was exiled. I would ask you, who had the hardest exile of anyone in the Bible? Perfect. Well, Christ. And why was Christ the hardest exile? He left heaven. He left perfection to come down and redeem us. Yes, my son, my
It's
dearest
an
son.
exile because he chose, so then wouldn't it be sojourn?
He could have been a good point. We'll call it sojourning. There could be a debate there a little bit about whether it was an exile or whether it was a sojourn, because who sent Joseph originally into exile? No, it wasn't. It was his dad. His dad said, "Go check on my brothers."
Oh.
And who sent Jesus here? His father. And later, Joseph said, "It wasn't my brothers that sent me to exile. It was God that did it." So it's really interesting when you read in Genesis about Joseph, he didn't attribute his exile to his brothers, and maybe not even to his physical dad, but he certainly attributed it to the spiritual dad, his Father in heaven. And there was a purpose for that exile. So I really appreciate that thought, Weston. I think you are on thinking about it, and their thought process is correct. It was sort of a voluntary exodus because he laid down his life voluntarily for us. He came out of heaven to come to this earth to redeem. So here's the question. What is the purpose of exile and sojourning? If God has it from Genesis to Revelation, and it's throughout the entire Bible, God doesn't do things without purpose. So I ask you, what is sojourning and exile? What is its purpose? Yeah? To bring you close, to bring you closer to God. To what? To learn. Because a lot of times when we think about exile, our first thought comes as it's punitive. Israel turns their heart to the Father, so God is going to come down with a big hammer, and he's going to hammer them and send them off into exile. And he usually doesn't do it in such a loving and gentle way. They generally, the Assyrians march in, the Babylonians march in, you get trafficked into the Midianites, you get thrown out of the garden and you have to go work on the soil that doesn't produce much except thorns. It's a pretty rough love, I suppose, if the idea is to bring you closer to him. But these are all concepts that I'd like to take from a theological, conceptual perspective and bring it a little bit into more of an experiential. Because it's one thing to know and to have the head knowledge of what the Bible says about exile and sojourning, and it's a totally different thing when it moves from your brain to your heart because you've experienced it. And just like God, when he brought me out of exile, made it experiential, I would pray that each of you would also feel that same love and same reception of the Father towards the Son that has been cast out. Because if we think about it, what did Christ talk about in the New Testament as a Proverbs of this exile? He had two sons, didn't he? And one went into exile and wandered about. And when he came back, did he know that his father loved him, or did he experience that his father loved him? So we all have this tendency to be prodigal and to go into exile, but I hope that you will all feel the Lord, his love, and his grace towards you. So I'm going to use the trip to sort of highlight some concepts around exile and sojourning that may help you frame and consider a little bit more about your own personal exile, your own personal sojourning, and how that might look on a personal level. So the first thing that I see when I look in the Bible is highlighted in Deuteronomy 10, 17 through 19. And in Deuteronomy it says, God loves the sojourner. It's kind of an odd statement. Why does God love the sojourner? It's coupled with he loves the fatherless and the widow at the same time. He says, remember the sojourner because you were once a sojourner. So God has a special place in his heart for those that are sojourning. Now, in the New Testament, there's a whole book dedicated to exiles. Anybody know what that book is? Hebrews 11 is a great verse that I would say definitely has to do with sojourning. We can almost all quote it. They wandered about looking for a heavenly city because they couldn't find a city, and they had all this hope, and we'll talk about that. But there's another book in the Bible, it's towards the end, that is all for exiles. And it starts this way. Peter, an apostle of Jesus Christ, to those who are elect exiles of the dispersion. The whole book is about exile. If you want to look at the end of it, it says to Silvanus, a faithful brother, as I regard him, I have written briefly to you, exhorting and declaring that this is the true grace of God. This is the true grace of God. Stand firm in it. She who is in Babylon, who is likewise chosen, sends you greetings. Was Peter writing from Babylon? No. Babylon was hundreds and hundreds of years before Peter wrote this book. See, Peter was living in the Roman era. See, Peter was writing to Gentiles, and he was using the Israeli Exodus as a reference. He was referencing back to Israel's exile, but he was writing about exile. That was what was on his mind. Now, Babylon was also used to refer generally to like all the world's governments. So there is a figurative component to it. But if you read through Peter, you're going to see these allusions to the exile that Israel went through. So in 1 Peter, he ends with, this is God's grace. And at the beginning of Peter, in 1:2, it says, may grace and peace be multiplied to you. See, Peter understood that God has grace and favor towards the exile. He has grace and favor to the sojourner. So I'd like to sort of talk about some of the grace that I experienced on the trail. Because I think it's really important for us to think as we walk through this life about what God is doing in our lives. So often we have a tendency to gravitate towards the negative. But as we walk through things, God is doing good things in our lives. And I think we have an obligation, and when good things happen in our lives, that we need to testify to it and bear witness of it. So here is my testimony. So as we are hiking through the Negev, ever since I went to Africa with Weston and got heat stress, I'm super sensitive to heat. They will tell you that I was dripping water through the desert. And the Negev is a pretty brutal environment. There is no water, there is constant sun. As we were hiking, I was like, Lord, I am cooking. And it's a sunny sky. But if you could give me cloud cover, that sure would be nice. But you're a big God. You're a God that doesn't even see us. I'm like dust on the scales of the world. It's just counted as nothing. So I know you're busy. But if there were clouds, that sure would be nice. And I kind of felt bad. I kind of felt stupid for thinking that God would answer that prayer. In just a short time, a cloud cover started coming over, and a light mist started falling. And as we climbed, I felt God's grace upon me. And that's a pretty amazing feeling. That maybe our Father would change the entire meteorological cycle for a small prayer, just to remind me that He loved me. I wouldn't do that in Kansas City. I wouldn't do that at home. But I certainly will do it when I'm out in the middle of nowhere and I'm cooking. What an amazing, gracious Father we have. Later, we walked by Timna Park. Timna Park is pretty famous because the Egyptians mined copper in that area, and there's Solomon's pillars there, and Solomon also ran his copper mines at 10 apart. It is in the desert and it's hot. And when you're hiking, there's one thing you take except water, and that's toilet paper, because you need toilet paper. And when you're hiking a long distance, it's not like you have like an extra inventory of toilet paper. And then when I went to Israel, I had a cold, and my nose was running, and I was like walking through, and I was like, Lord, I have some toilet paper, my nose is running, I really want to blow my nose, but I don't want to use my toilet paper to blow my nose. And this is really stupid, and I don't want to wipe it all over my shirt because I'll just gross out the boys. And yeah, this is okay. It's not like a big issue, but it's something that I'd like to really blow my nose at. And I kind of had my eyes closed a little bit, and I was looking around, and when I opened my eyes, right in front of the trail, there was a package of unopened tissue. I have never seen tissue on the trail any other place. I have hiked all over the world, and I have never seen tissue anywhere. But at that moment, there was a package of Kleenex right there. I mean, it was all those little packages. It was sitting right there in the trail. I took a picture of it. I could not believe that the Lord cared about my runny nose. That he would put a piece of tissue in front of me. I mean, how insignificant of that is that? I mean, he has starving people. He has all kinds of bigger issues than somebody's runny nose. But for some reason, there was a tissue in front of me, and I can say that was happenstance, that was chance. I could write that off. But come on. Is that by chance? Isn't that just a reminder of how good our God is and how personal he is? So we were hiking one day. We had just gone through a Bedouin village. The kids were teasing us. I kind of felt like a little bit uneasy. I'd read in the books that this is a particular rough area to go through. I couldn't really tell if the kids were teasing us or what, but they were kind of harassing us as we walked through the community. I couldn't speak their language and they couldn't speak mine. And finally we cleared the village, and Weston had taken us way out of the way. He had told us to turn right when we should have gone left. I could say this because he's out of the room, but now he's back. He made us go over this hill. I just felt a little bit disoriented. And as we kept walking, I started hearing thunder, and I was like, oh man, I'm not so worried about getting wet as I am worried about getting hit by lightning. And we still had to climb a mountain, and the mountain had a lot of exposure on it. And so the lightning started getting more intense, and it started raining. I was like, I don't know what to do. Maybe we should go lay down in a ditch. And I opened my eyes, and there's a cave right there. And so the boys and I crawl into the cave, and as soon as we crawl into the cave, it starts downpouring. I don't know how many people had taken refuge in that cave in the past. It was right on an ancient Roman road. You could still see the markers for the Roman road. We were seeing this cave, and this shepherd came up with all their sheep, and it was pretty funny because here Weston, Aiden, and I were in this cave, and this little shepherd boy came up, and he looked in the cave, and he just like started screaming because he wasn't expecting to see us in this cave. And they stayed outside in the rain and watched their sheep, and we sat inside this cave. And as soon as the rain stopped, we left that cave, and we started up on the walk on this mountain. And this mountain is going from Arad. It's a city that turned around Israel. So when Israel tried to come into the promised land after their spies had spied it out, it was the king of Arad, and that pushed them kind of back and moved them back down towards the Red Sea. And then they went over towards Moab in the other side. But we started climbing this mountain. And this is the mountain that takes us an ascent. You're starting to climb up into the hills, up towards Jerusalem. It's your first big ascent out of the desert. And the wildflowers were beautiful, and there was overcast and cloudy, and I just felt the Lord in such a very personal way that all I could really do is say, Lord, thank you. Thank you for this opportunity to be here and praise your name. And it was this exchange that happened on this climb up this mountain where I just felt the Lord's presence, and all I could do was just give him praise and thanksgiving. And once again, you feel God's presence as you're wandering in the desert. And we climbed that mountain, and it was about 10 kilometers. And when I got to the top of the mountain, there was a community up there, a village, that had set aside this tent for hikers. And if you were a hiker, you could call the community and you could go stay in this tent. It was a big tent. All the other hikers on the trail were in that tent when we got there. They were all soaking wet because they had hiked in the rain, but we had been sheltered in this cave, so we were dry. The moment we walked into that tent, the heavens opened and it poured like crazy. And the people would go outside and they'd get their shoes dirty, and eventually the tent had mud inside because people were tracking mud in, but we were dry. And so I just think about the Lord. He is our refuge. He is the one that shelters us during the storm. And he gave us this amazing opportunity just to walk in dryness and to praise and thank him as we walk. And then this list goes on and on and on. And I'll share one more. So we're in Israel is a very unusually rainy season. Generally, April has no rain, but we kept on being blessed with rain, and lots of rain. But you know when the rain fell? It only fell on the Sabbath, and it only fell on the last day of Passover. It was when we had shelter and when we were observing the Sabbath that it rained. And so we spent many days observing the Sabbath and watching it pour and hearing the lightning outside, but we were dry. So the Lord does pay attention to the sojourner in the little things. And I think we need to take note of those and testify of those as we walk through this sojourn that we're all on, and the Exodus that we're on. All right, point number 2. I thought we learned this when we were in YWAM. I thought I had learned this when we had to live in a little house in Mexico and use an outhouse. I thought we learned this when I was in a little tiny room in bunk beds with my wife and my daughter and my 2 sons. I thought I had learned to trust the Lord and not try to control and to manipulate and plan my life. So when we were in YWAM, everyone made a decision what we ate, when we ate, where we went. Didn't even tell us where we'd go. Sometimes it was just like a giant adventure. And for Americans, that's really hard because we are taught to control and plan and have everything planned out. Well, if Denmark and Mexico had not taught me that, then Israel definitely was going to teach that. It was going to teach me that I can have all kinds of plans where I'm going to eat, where I'm going to sleep, what I'm going to drink, I'm going to see where I'm going to go. And it definitely put a big exclamation mark on it. But I tell you, I still have not learned. And this is something I'm probably going to still struggle with for a while. Because when I was putting together this message, Jen will tell you that I spent hours trying to put this together, and this has been on my mind for a long, long time. And last night I just threw up my hands and said, this is not flowing. A lot of times when I do a message, you get in this flow and you're just like, everything's aligning, the scriptures are making sense, this is going to be easy, the Lord is with it. And on this particular one, nothing was coming together. I had tons of paper all over my desk downstairs. Nothing was coming together. And last night I threw up my hands and said, Lord, thanks for reminding me that this is not about me. This is about you. You have your own ideas, your own plans. May I just allow for holy interruption and for me to say whatever you want said. So I came in today a little bit feeling like I'm prepared, but I'm really not prepared. And that you have to leave room for the Lord to speak to whoever's there at that time. So this message is just reminding me that I am I'm still trying to figure out how to yield my life entirely to Him and exit my culture that says, I gotta have everything planned. I gotta have everything figured out. See, wandering in the desert is a bit like circumcision. Close your ears, Krista. No. It's a little bit like circumcision because all the coverings that you have in your life, all the things that you have prepared. See, we have this idea of home. Rick talked about this. It's a place of comfort. And we invest all of our time in creating comfort for ourselves. We make sure we have enough food, we have the right pots, we have the right room, we have all of these things that we try to create. It's almost like we're trying to recreate the Garden of Eden a little bit in our homes. The ancient kings always built gardens. King Solomon built gardens, the Assyrians built gardens. All of us are sort of in this quest to create this like ideal environment. Solomon spent a lot of time building gardens because he wanted a place of like relaxation and comfort and peace. And so we create this covering around us, this cocoon when we're at our homes, which is really not a home at all. It's just like we're trying to replicate something. We have this like whiff, this aroma of what home should be, but we're trying to recreate this. Well, when you go in the desert, you can't put all that stuff in your backpack. When Abraham left, I mean, think about that. I mean, he left his home, he left his father's grave, he left all of his, everything that was known, all the things that would bring comfort to him. He was basically, I can't even imagine how scary that would be. It would be like saying, all right, pick up your gear, Mrs. Frazee, you're going to go to Afghanistan. We're not going to give you like anything. You're just going to wander in. We're not even going to tell you where you're going to go, but you're going to go towards those mountains over there. The terror that you would have. And he might even do it with your knee. I mean, there's always going to be some obstacle associated with it. But when you're in the desert, you almost have a circumcision of all those comforts. And I think sojourning in Exodus, or not Exodus, Exile, are the Lord's way of stripping away all of those so that we have a more sensitive, we're more sensitive to His involvement in our lives. We have a heightened awareness because no longer do we have this covering that shields us from God's goodness. All that's stripped away. And you can't say when manna lands on the ground that, man, I worked really hard 6 days a week providing that, and I earned that. You have to really give credit where credit is due. And when the rock splits open, it wasn't like, hey kids, it was great that you went down to the river like I told you and hauled all that water back. I mean, you can only attribute it because He's burned away all the distractions. And so one of the distractions and one of the comforts is the planning and control. You start seeing that go away. And so I would spend a lot of time on the trail like, oh man, I've called a ton of people and no one has anything for us on the Sabbath. And see, the Sabbath in Israel is way different than the Sabbath here. See, the Sabbath in Israel starts at 2 o'clock in the afternoon. So if you want to like get groceries, you have to be off the trail at a grocery store and have completed your transaction by 2 o'clock. It doesn't go down when the sun goes down. The bus is shut down. Like if you miss your bus at 2 o'clock, you're basically stuck. People don't drive. I mean, the city's empty out. People go home and they spend time with their families and they sing songs and they praise the Lord. And you are basically, the Sabbath's a big deal. So that was a big concern for mine. Like, what are we going to do for the Sabbath? I'd start thinking about this on Monday. Yes. You know what? The Lord always gave us a place. Even like when Passover, last day of Passover was coming, like everyone goes, they exit. Like Passover's a big deal. It's a big family. It's bigger than Thanksgiving or Christmas here. It's like everyone goes and keeps Passover. Even the secular people do. And I had called lots of people, and everyone was like, no, we're out of town, we're with our family, can't stay with us. And I just got desperate. I was like, Lord, this is not working. My planning is not, I'm not in control of this environment. And then I just like did a Hail Mary and called a place that, and this lady answered. She said, oh, we definitely can't take you. The roads are flooded, there's an emergency watch, everything is, there's no way you can even get to us. And I was like, what is she talking about? And then she calls me back and she says, wait, where are you? And I said, well, I'm up at this such and such a town. And she said, oh, I'm down at a lot. I take phone numbers for a couple different places. She said, a lot, we have like these giant floods and people are dying and the roads are shut down. Yeah, where you are is fine. She said, but I don't have any place for you to stay, but I do know this farmer. Maybe you could call him. So it was just, she called me back. She'd already told me no. And then she calls me back and says, where are you? And then she says she has this farmer friend. And so I call this farmer because I'm kind of desperate. And the farmer says, I guess you can come stay with me. And so the boys and I go to this town. We walk along this road. We get to the end of the road and we can't like tell where we're supposed to go. And Aiden's like, I think it's down at the bottom of the hill. And I'm like, no, it's this way. And we walk through an olive grove and we're lost. And finally I just say, okay, I'll listen to my youngest son because sometimes he's wise. Look at that smile. And we get down to this farmer and he's like, yeah, I have an abandoned building over there. You guys can stay in that. So that's where we kept the last day of Passover. And it was not my plan. It was not my control. But the Lord, in a very obtuse way, provided a place for us. And then we were staying there, and sure enough, the rain poured and the lightning struck, and it was a great place to keep Passover. But once again, being a sojourner and being an exile has an amazing way of stripping away all the distractions. And maybe that's why the Lord loves an exile. Maybe that's why the reason the Lord loves a sojourner is because they're so quick to attribute where the true gift comes from. Because all their comforts and all their plans and all their controls have been laid at his feet, and they are totally vulnerable to him. So as you walk through this life, take note of God's grace and allow the control and the planning to fall away and give him opportunity to be involved in your life. And I'm speaking from a position where I have not let go. I have not let go of that control. I have not let go, but God is a really good God. He is long-suffering. He continues to come back and say, you haven't learned it, let's do it again. You haven't learned it, let's do it again. All right, I have quite a few more points. I don't know, where am I on time because I don't have a watch with me. Anybody have a watch? 12:07? Well, that's it, isn't it? What time's it end? 12:07? 12 o'clock? All right. Then I'm going to end right there because that, I'm going to give the Lord the opportunity to speak to all of you. The other points weren't supposed to be covered. Maybe some other day. So remember God's grace and remember to lay aside your control, because home is not a place. Home is a relationship. When Adam and Eve were cast out of the garden, sure, they could have gone back to the garden. But if the Lord wasn't there, there wouldn't be home. And so when you look to what home is, remember, God wants a relationship with you. He wants to have grace towards you. He wants you to lay down everything so he can pick it up. So if there's anything that I learned on this trip, is that God's presence is what we're seeking. That is home. And we've all seen it to different degrees, but it is a home that is still to come. And back to Hebrews 11, they wandered as sojourners and exiles, looking for something that was eternal. Not the Garden of Eden, not Canaan, not Lewisburg, not Kansas City, not Jerusalem, but a new Jerusalem where God would be with them. And he would be their God, and they would be his people.